Now that we've gone over a bit of the history, it's time we go over how the system works. First, we should address the map of the train system. I think there's a general lack of educational information regarding the train system visually speaking. While there are a lot of maps out there that show Tokyo's train lines, they largely seem to be split into two groups. The first are overly simplistic, only showing the order of the stations, which doesn't really help you understand their actual locations in Tokyo or their distances relative to each other. And the second are convoluted graphical nightmares, which while on one hand hold a lot of useful information, on the other make everything look much more complicated than it really is. So I'll take the next few moments to show you the map I've made, where you can see the train lines as they would appear on an actual map of Tokyo, and break down the lines by company. In this section, I want to first get everyone familiar with the shape of the network, so I don't want to focus on the train stations just yet. I'll save that for the study section, which will go over every station on the Tokyo Metro and Toei subway lines, and what I think are the three most important JR East lines. Let's start with the largest and most widely used company, JR East. As you can see, JR East run a fair few lines, but we'll just be focusing on Tokyo, so we won't worry about the lines that don't actually pass through the metropolitan area. In total, there's the Yamanote, Keihin Tohoku, Chuo Sobu, Chuo, Sobu, Yokosuka, Utsunomiya, Takasaki, Tokaido, Ueno Tokyo, Saikyo, Shonan Shinjuku, Joban, and Keio lines. The most popular JR line is without a doubt the Yamanote line. The Yamanote line is a loop in the center of Tokyo that includes some of the most famous stations in the world: Tokyo, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Akihabara, and such. Next, let's look at the subway system. Tokyo's subway system is split into two companies. There's Tokyo Metro, which operate the Ginza, Marunouchi, Hibiya, Tozai, Chiyoda, Yurakucho, Hanzomon, Namboku, and Fukutoshin lines, and Toei Subway, which run the Oedo, Asakusa, Mita, and Shinjuku lines. Before we go on to the other private railway companies, I want to quickly introduce the airports and explain through lines. There are two airports in the Greater Tokyo area: Haneda Airport and Narita International Airport. Narita is further away, being located shortly outside the Tokyo wards in Chiba Prefecture. There are a few lines that operate services to and from Narita. There's the two Keisei electric railway lines, the Keisei Main Line, and the Narita Sky Access Line, and the JR East Narita Express. Next we have Haneda Airport. Haneda is much closer, located within the special wards of Tokyo. Haneda is served by the Keikyu Airport Line and Tokyo Monorail. Now let's discuss through lines, or sometimes called through services. Because Tokyo's train network is so interconnected, sometimes when a train meets the end of its line, it will immediately continue into a different line. Let's try an example of it with these lines here. Just by looking at this map, If we were to try and get to Narita from Haneda Airport, it looks like we'd have to transfer a bunch of times. But that's actually not the case. You see, the Keikyu Airport line has a through service to the Keikyu main line when it reaches Keikyu Kamata Station. So if we simply stay on board, we'll be on our way to Shinagawa Station, where again, the Keikyu main line has a through service to the Toei Subway Asakusa line. So if we stay on board again, we'll be on our way to the last station of the Asakusa line, Oshiage Station, which is right outside the Skytree, by the way. And there again is a through service to the Keisei Oshiage line, then to the Keisei main line, which will take us to Narita Airport. Now, you do have to pay attention to which services offer through lines, so it won't necessarily take this route in one uninterrupted train ride. But this is just one example of how knowing what lines will turn into what can give you a huge advantage when traveling in Tokyo. Now finally, let's go over the other main private railway companies that operate in the Greater Tokyo area. Along with JR East, Toei Subway, and Tokyo Metro, there's Keisei in the east, which operates services to Chiba Prefecture, Tobu running in the north, and Seibu in the northwest connect Saitama Prefecture to Tokyo. Keio in the west and Tokyu in the southwest run popular services for Tokyo residents living outside of the metropolitan area. And finally, Keikyu, Odakyu, and Sotetsu in the south and southwest, running services to Kanagawa Prefecture. There are more companies, but these are the main ones that offer the most used lines. There are also quite a few popular lines running in Tokyo outside these main companies. For example, the Tokyo Monorail, which goes through many famous tourist locations, as well as Haneda Airport. The Disney Resort Line, Yuri Kamome Line, Tsukuba Express, the Minato Mirai Line, which terminates at Yokohama Chinatown, and the Nippori Toneri Liner, to name a few. It may seem a little daunting now that we have a clearer understanding of the scale of the network, but in reality a lot of these companies and lines are interconnected. This makes traveling between companies relatively stress-free. But you should be aware that different companies sometimes run stations with the same name as other companies, but in completely different locations. For example, the popular Ueno station on the Yamanote line is actually not connected to Keisei's Ueno station. So if you want to transfer over to a Keisei line in Ueno, you'd have to leave JR Ueno and walk across the street. In this manner, it can be prudent to think of these private railway companies as somewhat separate from each other. But still, all of the companies mentioned above support IC cards, so aside from the walking, actually transferring between train lines shouldn't be a hassle. Now a quick disclaimer, there are some services that do require you to book or purchase an actual ticket, for example Shinkansen do, but even in that circumstance you're likely able to use the IC card to pay for a ticket. So try to be mindful of what kind of train you're getting on. I'll go over some of the different kinds of trains in just a minute. The next big convenience for travelers are the signs and announcements. Almost all the signs in the stations and on the trains are accompanied by their English translations, and important announcements are usually repeated in English as well. Now, while the system has clearly been made with English speakers in mind, and tourists with absolutely no Japanese at all can and do make their way from A to B with relative ease, especially with apps like Google Maps and Google Translate at their disposal, personally, I think there's a great benefit to learning some essential Japanese before arrival. While it may not be necessary, in my experience, even just a little Japanese will take you a long way. It's clear that respect is a large part of Japanese culture, and I think that showing people that you're making a conscious effort to learn and communicate makes all the difference. So I'd like to take a moment to briefly go over some kanji and vocab that'll help you make your way around stations a little bit easier. The first two words you should probably know are densha, train, and chikatetsu, subway. Den meaning electricity, and sha meaning car or carriage. So pretty easy to understand. Next, chika, underground, tetsu, iron, chikatetsu, subway. These two words are rather common, so you're likely to hear them often. Kippu. Kippu means ticket. Now I strongly recommend to everybody planning to use public transport in Japan to buy an IC card. It will make your trip so much more simple, and you won't have to stress out about calculating or adjusting fares mid-journey. Like I said before, some services do require you to buy a ticket, but in those circumstances there will almost certainly be English instructions, and you can likely pay for the ticket with your IC card if you wish to do so. Otsuri. This is another simple one. It just means change. You see it on the ticket and fare adjustment machines, and you're likely to hear it when you buy something in a store. Something to make a little note of. In most stores and restaurants, they will hand it to you on a small tray. Eki. Eki means station, and exactly like in English, it's also used as a suffix following the name of the station. For example, Tokyo Station is Tokyo Eki. There are also a few more words that use the kanji eki. There's ekimae, which literally means station front, or in front of the station. This is a term you can commonly see when people are trying to meet up. The area outside a train station is a popular spot because it's easy to get to and usually a rather wide open space. There's also ekiben, which is a shortened form of ekibento, meaning station lunchbox. These are lunchboxes sold in stations often before departures on long-distance trains, like Shinkansen. They're very popular and a much more luxurious option compared to most lunches sold in convenience stores. Guchi. Next we have an important kanji that denotes exits. Kuchi or guchi literally means mouth, opening or gap. In this instance it serves as a suffix meaning exit. The kanji you commonly see attached before it are as follows: deguchi, exit; iriguchi, entrance; kitaguchi, northern exit; higashiguchi, eastern exit; minamiguchi, southern exit; and nishiguchi, western exit. A side note for the Japanese learners out there. In Japanese, regarding kanji compounds that contain two or more kanji, the general rule of thumb is that you use onyomi, the Chinese voicing. However, there are kunyomi compounds. Though uncommon, they are sometimes used in words regarding nature or the cardinal directions, like in these examples. That's why eastern exit, for example, is read as higashiguchi and not toko. You have to be careful because not every compound containing one of these cardinal directions are kunyomi. For example, Tokyo uses east and capital, but isn't read as Higashi Miyako. Kunyomi compounds are rare, but something you should be aware of. Shūten, shūden. The next two words are important. This kanji, shū, means last or final. This word, shūten, means last stop or terminus, and shūden means last train. Although Tokyo has been called a city that never sleeps, its train system certainly does, for the public that is at least. Most train lines in Tokyo will end services between midnight and 1 AM, so be wary of the shūden. Next we have the kanji for left, hidari, and right, migi. As you can imagine, these two kanji show up a fair bit. For example, you can hear migigawa and hidarigawa every time the train pulls into a station, letting you know what side the doors will open on. Mana mode. Mana mode means to put your phone on silent mode. In Japan, taking phone calls on the train or doing something noisy with your phone is considered to be quite rude and is avoided if possible. There's no problem with using your phone, but making sure it's on silent is the socially encouraged option. It's not all that different from putting your phone on silent during a movie. Another note for Japanese learners, this is what we call wasei-eigo, meaning Japanese-made English. Wasei-eigo are Japanese expressions that are based on English words that do not exist in standard English or whose meanings differ from the words they were derived from. In this case, the English words used are manner and mode. Norikae, noriba. Nori means to ride and kae means to change. So norikae means to transfer. We can also see nori in noriba, meaning platform. Next, we have otoko, meaning men, and onna, meaning women. These two kanji show up a fair bit. They're important to know because they will sometimes indicate areas designated only for men or only women. For example, you'll find them outside toilets usually. Another place you'll see onna in a train station is in the word josei senyōsha, meaning women-only car. Some trains will have these women-only carriages. They're often pink and will have signs on them and on the platform where they stop to inform passengers. Greensha. Greensha, meaning green car, is a special carriage. The seats are only available to those who reserve them, and are more like the seats you'll find on a Shinkansen or an aeroplane. If it's looking busy, be careful you're not lining up for a greensha. The type or number of the carriage should be clearly labeled on the floor of the platform. Sen. Next we have the prefix sen, which means track or line. It's another simple one, performing the same role as in English. An example would be Yamanote-sen, which directly translates as Yamanote line. There's also Bansen, which is a prefix denoting the track number. The number preceding Bansen will let you know what track your train will be on, and more than likely will be accompanied by English if written on a ticket, but still good to know. In Japan, a single train line will usually offer different services. These services differ from each other by the speed of the train, or more commonly by the amount of stops. The rule of thumb is, the services with faster trains or fewer stops will be more expensive. Each company will have their own types of services, and their names are sometimes the same but sometimes different. I'll list a few, but just be aware they may be called something different on a line you're researching. Futsu. This literally means ordinary, usual, or normal, but is translated as local. This is usually the cheapest service offered, with the train stopping at every station along the line. If you're in a hurry, it may be a good idea to avoid local lines. Kaisoku. Next we have Kaisoku, which is translated as rapid. This service will stop at less stations than a local line, but with no additional cost or surcharge. Kyuko. Kyuko translates as express. These trains will usually skip more stations than rapid trains, and may also travel at higher speeds. They will cost more than rapid and local lines. Tokkyu. Finally we have Tokkyu, which translates as limited express. As you've probably guessed, these trains will stop at even less than express trains, and cost the most outside of Shinkansen.